The basketball court was empty, the echoes of bouncing balls and shouting teammates replaced by a silence that felt almost eerie. I'd stayed late after practice to review plays, going over every detail of tomorrow's game in my head. When I heard a laugh, a light, familiar sound that sent a shiver down my spine, I froze. It was Natalie's laugh, my wife. At first I thought I was imagining things. Natalie didn't come to practice. She hated sports, often teasing me about my obsession with the team. Curiosity, and something darker, drove me to follow the sound. Peering around the corner, I saw them. Natalie was standing in the shadows of the locker room, her hand resting on someone's chest. His face was obscured, but his body language said everything I needed to know. His hand rested lightly on her hip, his posture relaxed and confident. I didn't need to see his face to understand. My heart stopped as Natalie tilted her head, her lips brushing his. The shock paralyzed me. This couldn't be real. Natalie wasn't perfect, but she was mine. We'd built a life together, one I thought was solid. And now, it was crumbling before my eyes. They didn't notice me as I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. The world felt like it was spinning too fast, and I stumbled blindly out of the gym, my mind a whirlpool of disbelief and rage. The drive home was a blur. By the time Natalie walked through the door an hour later, her face glowing with the same casual smile she always wore, I couldn't even look at her. "How was practice?" she asked, kissing my cheek like nothing had changed. "Fine," I muttered, my voice barely audible. She didn't seem to notice, bustling into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. "Big game tomorrow, right?" she asked, her tone light and cheerful. I nodded, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the image of her betrayal replaying in my mind like a broken record. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And how was I supposed to move forward from here? The rage simmering in my chest told me one thing. I couldn't let this go unanswered. Natalie had made her move. Now it was my turn. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Natalie humming in the kitchen. Her usual routine, coffee brewing, eggs sizzling, felt jarring in its normalcy. I stayed in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the woman downstairs with the one I'd seen in the locker room last night. She'd kissed another man, touched him like she used to touch me. The image of her betrayal burned in my mind, fueling the storm brewing in my chest. When I finally got up and joined her, she greeted me with her usual sunny smile. "Morning," she chirped, sliding a plate of eggs and toast across the counter. I forced a smile. "Morning." She leaned in to kiss me, and I stiffened, her lips brushing my cheek. If she noticed my reaction, she didn't show it. "How's the team looking for tonight?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "Good," I lied. The truth was, I hadn't thought about the team since last night. Basketball, my one true escape, had been overshadowed by the image of Natalie in someone else's arms. I studied her as she spoke, searching for any sign of guilt. But her expression was calm, her tone light, her demeanor so convincingly normal that it made me question what I'd seen. Had I imagined it? No. I couldn't forget the way she'd leaned into him, the way he'd touched her. "Do you need me to pick anything up for the post-game party?" she asked, her voice snapping me back to the present. "No," I said shortly, my appetite gone. She tilted her head, her smile faltering slightly. "You okay? You seem off." "Just tired," I said, forcing a yawn. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she shrugged and went back to her coffee. After breakfast, I sat in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel and staring at the house. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers. But the rage and confusion swirling in my chest made it impossible to think straight. I needed proof, something concrete to back up what I'd seen. That afternoon, I drove to a tech store and bought a GPS tracker. It felt wrong, invasive, but the memory of her betrayal overrode any guilt. If Natalie wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. Later that evening, as she got ready for the game, I slipped the tracker into the glove compartment of her car. It was small, undetectable, and linked to an app on my phone. When she drove off tomorrow, I'd know exactly where she went. That night, as I sat on the bench during the game, I couldn't focus. The players moved in a blur, their shouts and cheers fading into the background. All I could think about was Natalie, her smile, her lies. When the final buzzer sounded, signaling our team's win, I barely mustered a smile. The players celebrated, the crowd roared, but my mind was elsewhere. I needed answers. And soon, I'd have them. The next morning, I woke early, unable to shake the restless energy buzzing under my skin. Natalie was still asleep, her face serene and peaceful in a way that almost made me question everything. But the tracker on her car, the one I'd carefully placed the night before, reminded me that doubt wasn't an option. If she was hiding something, I was going to find out. By the time she woke up, I was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through my phone. "Morning," she said, kissing my cheek as she reached for the coffee pot. Her touch sent a ripple of anger through me, but I hid it, masking my emotions behind a neutral expression. "Morning," I said casually. She sipped her coffee, leaning against the counter as she scrolled through her own phone. "Busy day today?" I asked, my tone light. She nodded. "I've got a yoga class this afternoon, and then I might meet up with a friend for lunch." Her words were innocuous, but they sent a pang of suspicion through me. Was this friend the man I'd seen her with in the locker room? "Sounds nice," I said, forcing a smile. When she left the house an hour later, I waited until her car disappeared down the street before pulling out my phone. The GPS app lit up, a blinking dot showing her location as she headed downtown. I watched as she pulled into the parking lot of her yoga studio, the dot stopping near the entrance. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe she really was going to yoga. Maybe I'd overreacted. But that didn't stay there for long. 20 minutes later, it started moving again, weaving through the streets until it stopped at a cafe on the other side of town. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. This wasn't part of her usual routine. Who was she meeting? Grabbing my keys, I drove to the cafe, parking a block away to avoid being seen. Through the large windows, I saw her sitting at a corner table, her back to me. She was alone, but her posture was tense, her eyes flicking to the entrance every few seconds. She was waiting for someone. Minutes later, he arrived, the man from the locker room. I couldn't see his face clearly from my vantage point, but I recognized his build, the way he moved with an air of confidence. He slid into the seat across from her, his body language easy, familiar. Natalie smiled, leaning forward slightly as they began to talk. I sat frozen in my car, watching as they laughed, their conversation animated and intimate. It was clear they shared more than just casual friendship. My stomach churned as I snapped a few photos with my phone, each one a knife to the gut. When Natalie finally left the cafe, her expression was calm, composed, completely at odds with the storm raging inside me. She didn't see me as she walked back to her car, her phone in hand and a faint smile on her lips. As she drove off, I stayed in my car, my mind racing. I had proof now, proof that she was meeting someone behind my back. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. That night, as Natalie cooked dinner and chatted about her day, I sat silently at the table, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. She was still keeping secrets, and I was determined to uncover every last one of them. Dinner that night was torture. Natalie smiled, laughed, and told me about her yoga class and a lunch she claimed she'd had with an old college friend. Her lies slipped from her lips so easily it made me sick. She had no idea I'd followed her, that I'd seen her at the cafe with the man from the locker room. I kept my responses short, nodding or murmuring acknowledgments, trying to mask the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Later, as she cleaned up in the kitchen, I retreated to my office, locking the door behind me. I opened my laptop, scrolling through the photos I'd taken of Natalie and her mystery man at the cafe. They were blurry, taken from a distance, but they told a clear story. The way she leaned toward him, her smile bright and unguarded, the easy laughter that lit up her face. She hadn't smiled at me like that in years. I needed to know more. Pulling up social media, I scrolled through Natalie's accounts, searching for anything that might point to her connection with him. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A photo from a charity event 2 months ago caught my eye. Natalie stood among a group of people, her arm linked with mine, her smile dazzling. And there, just a few feet away, was him. The caption read, "Great night supporting a wonderful cause with friends and family." Friends. My jaw tightened as I stared at the image, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. This wasn't a random stranger. He was someone from our social circle, someone who'd been close enough to attend our events, to stand beside us and pretend to care. When Natalie came to bed later that night, she slipped under the covers and kissed my cheek, her touch light and familiar. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I lied, turning onto my side to avoid looking at her. She hesitated, her hand lingering on my arm. "All right," she said finally, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Moments later, her breathing evened out as she drifted to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. The next day, I made a call to Kevin, an old friend who worked in private security. "Ryan," he said, answering on the second ring. "What's up? I need your help," I said, my voice steady. "And it's not something I can handle on my own." "Say the word," he replied. "What do you need?" Within hours, Kevin had set up a way to track Natalie's phone and monitor her text messages. It felt invasive, wrong, but the memory of her at the cafe, laughing with another man, erased any guilt I might have felt. I wasn't just going to catch her in the act. I was going to expose every lie she'd told. That evening, as Natalie chatted with me over dinner about her plans for the weekend, I nodded along, my mind elsewhere. By the time she left for bed, I had her phone records open on my laptop, scrolling through her messages with a mix of anger and dread. There it was, a string of texts with an unsaved number. "Natalie, lunch tomorrow? Same place. Unknown. Of course. Can't wait to see you. Natalie, me too. I've missed you." The timestamps aligned perfectly with the cafe visit. My stomach churned as I read through the messages, each one a dagger to the heart. I sat back, my hands shaking. Natalie was cheating on me, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. But who was this man? And how long had they been doing this? I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed to know everything. The messages haunted me. Each one was a reminder that the woman I'd built a life with had been living a secret life, one I'd been too blind to see. But who was this man? The photos I'd taken at the cafe didn't show his face clearly, and the unsaved number in her text gave me nothing. I needed more. The next morning, as Natalie went through her routine, I pretended to do the same. "Big day at work?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "A few meetings." "You?" "Just yoga," she replied casually. "And then I might do some shopping." Her lies were so effortless, so smooth, that they sent a fresh wave of anger through me. But I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Have fun," I said, my voice calm. When she left, I waited until her car was down the street before pulling out my phone. The GPS tracker showed her heading downtown, just as she'd said. I sat in my car, watching the app closely. Sure enough, she parked at the yoga studio. But 15 minutes later, the dot moved again. This time, she stopped at a hotel on the outskirts of town. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. This wasn't lunch. This wasn't yoga. This was something else entirely. I drove to the hotel, parking discreetly in the lot across the street. From my car, I watched as Natalie walked inside, her posture relaxed and confident. She wasn't nervous or hesitant. She'd done this before. I waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. 15 minutes later, the man from the cafe arrived. This time, I saw his face clearly. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just anyone. It was Coach Daniels. The realization hit me like a freight train. Daniels, my mentor, my colleague, the man I trusted implicitly, was the one Natalie had been sneaking around with. My mind raced as I watched him stride into the hotel, his demeanor calm and confident. How long had this been going on? Had they laughed about me behind my back, their betrayal hidden in plain sight? I waited in the car for over an hour, my thoughts a swirling storm of rage and heartbreak. When they finally emerged, their laughter and easy conversation were like knives to my chest. I snapped more photos, capturing every moment, my hands trembling as I documented their betrayal. Back at home, Natalie acted as if nothing had happened. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her bag down and pouring herself a glass of wine. "Busy," I said shortly, my voice strained. She didn't seem to notice, chatting about her yoga class and the cute little store she'd visited afterward. Every word was a lie. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had the proof I needed, photos, messages. But this wasn't just about catching her anymore. This was about making her, and Daniels, pay. The next morning, I woke up with a cold sense of clarity. The shock of seeing Natalie and Daniels together was fading, replaced by a focused determination. It wasn't enough to confront them. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, the way they had made me feel powerless and humiliated. If Natalie and Daniels thought they could sneak around and keep me in the dark, they were about to find out how wrong they were. Natalie's demeanor that morning was frustratingly chipper. She kissed my cheek as I poured my coffee, her smile warm and oblivious. "I might meet up with some friends later," she said casually, grabbing her bag. "Sounds fun," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't even flinch. When she was out the door, I got to work. My first call was to Kevin, the private security friend who'd helped me set up the tracker. "Ryan," he said, picking up on the first ring. "How's it going?" "It's time," I said, my voice steady. Kevin didn't ask questions. He'd known from the beginning that this was leading to something big. We met at his office later that day, where he laid out surveillance footage and copies of the photos I'd sent him. "You were right," he said, gesturing to the screen where Daniels and Natalie were visible outside the hotel. "They've been meeting regularly, hotels, cafes, even charity events. It's a pattern." "Good," I said, my jaw tight. "That's exactly what I need." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan?" "I want them exposed," I said firmly. "Publicly. No room for denials." Kevin leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I've got just the thing," he said. He opened a laptop, pulling up a software program that allowed us to sync all the evidence, photos, messages, and audio recordings into a timeline. By the time he was finished, it was like watching a crime unfold in slow motion. "Once you're ready," Kevin said, "we can send this to whoever you want. Their work, their friends, their families, it's all one click away." But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. I needed to set the stage. That evening, as Natalie cooked dinner, I sat at the table, scrolling through my phone and pretending to be distracted. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, setting a plate in front of me. I looked up, forcing a small smile. "Just the game this weekend." Daniel said he had some new strategies he wanted to try. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her wine glass, but her expression didn't falter. "Oh," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "That's good. He's always so prepared." Her attempt to sound casual made my stomach churn, but I nodded, keeping up the facade. That night, after she went to bed, I drafted an anonymous message to Daniels. "You think no one knows? Think again. Watch your back." I sent it to his work email, knowing it would rattle him. The message wasn't just a warning. It was the first move in my game. By the next morning, Natalie was acting even more anxious, her phone glued to her hand. "Everything okay?" I asked as she scrolled through her messages. "Yeah," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just some work stuff." Her lies were becoming easier to spot, and I was counting on her to slip. The pieces of my plan were falling into place. Now, it was only a matter of time before they realized just how far I was willing to go. The message I'd sent to Daniels did exactly what I'd hoped it would. It threw him off balance. By mid-morning, Kevin called with an update. "He's spooked," Kevin said, his voice laced with amusement. "Daniels has been pacing his office for the past hour, making frantic phone calls. Looks like you got under his skin." "Good," I replied, gripping the phone tightly. "What about Natalie?" "She's texted him twice already today," Kevin said. Both messages are vague, but the timestamps line up with Daniel's calls. So, they were scrambling together. Perfect. When I got home that evening, Natalie was on edge, her movements sharp and restless as she prepared dinner. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning casually against the counter. She flinched slightly, but covered it with a laugh. "Yeah, just a long day. Work's been a little crazy." "Must be," I said, keeping my tone light. "You've seemed distracted lately." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching for something, accusation, suspicion, but I gave her nothing. She didn't respond, instead turning back to the stove. After dinner, she excused herself to make a call, claiming it was work-related. From the living room, I listened carefully, her muffled voice carrying through the thin walls. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was tense, hurried. It didn't take a genius to guess who she was talking to. The next morning, Kevin provided me with more surveillance footage, this time from Daniel's home. "He had a visitor last night," Kevin said, pulling up a clip of Natalie slipping through the side gate of Daniel's yard. My stomach churned as I watched her glance around nervously before disappearing into the house. She stayed for about an hour, Kevin continued. Long enough to discuss whatever plan they're cooking up. I stared at the screen, a fresh wave of anger surging through me. They thought they could outmaneuver me. They were wrong. That evening, I played another card, leaving an anonymous note in Daniel's mailbox. The truth always comes out. Tick-tock. It was vague enough to keep them guessing, but direct enough to fuel their paranoia. When I got home, Natalie was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a furrowed brow. Long day? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She looked up, startled, and quickly put her phone down. Yeah, just busy. You seem stressed, I said, sitting beside her. Is everything okay? Of course, she said quickly, forcing a smile. Why wouldn't it be? Her deflection only confirmed what I already knew. She was unraveling. Later that night, as Natalie slept beside me, I reviewed the text Kevin had intercepted between her and Daniels. Daniels, we need to meet again. Someone knows. Natalie, I know. I'm scared, Mark. What if Ryan finds out? Daniels, he won't. We'll handle this. Handle this. The audacity of his words made my blood boil. But they didn't realize the game had already shifted. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was preparing my next move. The intercepted text from Natalie and Daniels played in my mind as I drove to work the next morning. What if Ryan finds out? She was scared good, but fear alone wasn't enough. I needed to push them further, to make their walls of secrecy crumble completely. This wasn't just about catching them anymore. It was about control. Kevin called midday with more updates. They've scheduled a meeting at Daniel's office, he said. Tomorrow night, after hours. What time? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. 7, he replied. It's not their usual hotel meetup. Looks like they're trying to stay under the radar. I smirked. Perfect. The rest of the day was a blur as I finalized my plan. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Instead, I'd set a trap. That evening, I prepared carefully, drafting an email that would sow more seeds of doubt. From Anonymous to Mark Daniels. Subject, you can't hide forever. The walls are closing in. Do you really think she won't slip up? Or that he won't find out? I hit send, my satisfaction growing as I imagined Daniel's reaction. The man who'd stolen my wife thought he was untouchable. It was time to show him just how wrong he was. Natalie was quieter than usual that evening, her phone clutched in her hand as she sat across from me at the dinner table. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded quickly, forcing a smile. Yeah, just a busy day. Her deflection had become so routine, it almost didn't bother me anymore. Almost. After dinner, she retreated to the bedroom, claiming she was exhausted. I waited until I heard the shower running before slipping into her office. Her laptop sat open on the desk, the screen dark. With a quick glance toward the hallway, I woke it up, her email inbox appearing instantly. She hadn't logged out. Amateur. I scanned her recent emails, my stomach churning as I found messages exchanged with Daniels under a generic subject line. Project updates. The messages were written in code, with vague references that seemed innocuous at first glance. But I wasn't stupid. Natalie, the situation is under control for now, but we need to talk in person. Daniels agreed. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., my office. I forwarded the messages to myself, my anger simmering as I shut the laptop and returned to the living room. That night, as Natalie slept soundly beside me, I finalized my preparations. I would be at Daniel's office tomorrow night, hidden in the shadows. And when the moment was right, I'd strike. The next day dragged by, every hour feeling like an eternity. By the time 6:30 rolled around, I was parked a block away from Daniel's office, my heart pounding in my chest. Kevin had provided me with access to the building's security system, allowing me to monitor their movements in real time. At 6:55, Natalie arrived. She looked around nervously before slipping inside, her figure illuminated briefly by the glow of the streetlights. I watched the live feed on my phone as she entered Daniel's office, her body language tense. Daniels greeted her, his expression serious as he locked the door behind her. They sat down, their voices muffled, but clear enough for the microphone Kevin had planted earlier. Did you get the email? Natalie asked, her voice shaky. Yes, Daniels replied. Do you think it's him? I don't know, she said, her tone desperate. But I can't keep living like this, Mark. He's going to figure it out. I clenched my fists, their words confirming what I already knew. They were scared. Good. They should be. I sat in my car, gripping my phone as the live feed played out on the screen. The camera Kevin had set up in Daniel's office captured every movement, every word. Natalie sat across from Daniel's, her posture rigid, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "We need to be smart about this," Daniel said, his tone low but firm. "How?" Natalie shot back, her voice trembling. "Whoever's sending these emails knows too much. What if it's Ryan?" Daniel shook his head. "If he knew, he would have confronted us by now. This is someone else." The arrogance in his voice sent a fresh wave of anger through me. He thought he could outsmart me. He thought wrong. Natalie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We can't keep meeting like this. It's too risky." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're right. Let's lay low for a while. No more texts, no more meetings." "And the baby?" Natalie asked, her voice breaking. The mention of the baby hit me like a punch to the gut. Daniels looked at her, his expression softening. "We'll figure it out. Together." Natalie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mark. I feel like my whole life is falling apart." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But the memory of her betrayal, her lies, crushed any sympathy I might have felt. As their conversation continued, I carefully planned my next move. It wasn't enough to catch them. I wanted to expose them, publicly. Kevin had given me everything I needed. The footage, the messages, and the ability to access the building's intercom system remotely. With the push of a button, their conversation would be broadcast throughout the entire office. A fitting stage for their humiliation. I waited for the perfect moment, watching as Daniels reached across the desk to take Natalie's hand. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "We'll get through this." Natalie nodded, her sobs quieter now. The sight of them, together, comforting each other, sent a surge of rage through me. They didn't deserve comfort. They deserved consequences. I pressed the button. The intercom crackled to life, their voices echoing through the empty building. "We can't keep meeting like this. It's too risky. No more texts, no more meetings." "And the baby?" Their heads snapped up in unison, panic flashing across their faces. "What the hell?" Daniels muttered, standing abruptly. Natalie's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone's listening." I smirked, satisfaction coursing through me as I watched them scramble. Daniels moved toward the door, checking the lock before glancing around the room. "There's no one here," he said, his voice tight. "It's probably a glitch." Natalie shook her head, her breathing shallow. "This isn't a glitch, Mark. Someone knows." Their panic was palpable, their carefully constructed lies unraveling in real time. It was everything I'd hoped for. But I wasn't done yet. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the building, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and fury. It was time to confront them, face to face. The cold night air bit at my face as I approached the office building, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Inside, Natalie and Daniels were still reeling from the intercom broadcast, their panicked movements visible on the live feed on my phone. Every step I took was deliberate, my anger sharpening with each one. It wasn't just about catching them anymore. It was about making them see what their betrayal had done to me. I reached the front door and used the access code Kevin had provided to let myself in. The building was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights humming faintly as I made my way down the hallway. Their voices grew louder as I approached Daniel's office. "What do we do?" Natalie was saying, her voice trembling. "We stay calm," Daniels replied, though his tone betrayed his fear. "Whoever's messing with us doesn't have the guts to confront us directly." His words sent a surge of rage through me. "Oh, I have the guts." I pushed the door open, stepping into the room. The sudden motion startled them both, their heads snapping toward me. "Ryan!" Natalie exclaimed, her face pale. "What are you doing here?" Daniel stood quickly, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed bitterly, closing the door behind me. "It's exactly what it looks like." The room was thick with tension, the silence stretching uncomfortably as I stared them down. Natalie's eyes darted nervously between me and Daniel's. "Ryan, please let me explain." "Explain?" I snapped, my voice rising. "What exactly do you think you can explain, Natalie? The lies? The sneaking around?" Or maybe the fact that you're carrying his child. Her gasp was audible, her hands flying to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. Daniel stepped forward, his tone defensive. Look, I don't know how you found out, but this doesn't have to get ugly. I fixed him with a cold stare. Ugly? You think this isn't already ugly, Daniels? You think sneaking around with my wife wasn't ugly? Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, stepping closer. I trusted you, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I looked up to you, and you did this. He looked away, guilt flashing across his face. Natalie sobbed quietly, her hands shaking as she tried to speak. Ryan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Don't, I said sharply, my gaze snapping to her. Don't you dare say you didn't mean for this to happen. You chose this, Natalie. Every text, every meeting, every lie, you chose this. She broke down completely, her sobs filling the room. For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up so they could see the screen. I have everything, I said coldly. The texts, the photos, the recordings. Everything. Daniels paled, his bravado crumbling as he realized the extent of my evidence. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you out, I said, my tone icy. Out of my life, out of this town, and out of her life. He hesitated, glancing at Natalie, who was still crying silently. Do it, she whispered, her voice broken. Just go, Mark. Please. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he nodded, the fight draining out of him. I turned to Natalie, my chest tightening as I looked at the woman I'd once loved. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said quietly, but I'm done letting you lie to me. From now on, I call the shots. She nodded, her tears spilling over as she whispered, I'll do whatever it takes, Ryan. I swear. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control, a sliver of power in a situation that had nearly destroyed me. But the road ahead was still uncertain, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to walk it. The drive home was silent, the tension in the car so thick it was suffocating. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, her head bowed, her tears long dried. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Every glance, every thought of her was a reminder of the betrayal, the lies, the life we'd built that was now irreparably fractured. When we pulled into the driveway, she hesitated before getting out, her hand lingering on the door handle. Ryan, she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't respond, stepping out of the car and heading toward the house. Behind me, I heard her quiet footsteps following. Inside, I went straight to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of whiskey and downing it in one gulp. Natalie lingered near the doorway, her presence almost unbearable. Can we talk? She asked cautiously. I set the glass down hard on the counter, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Talk, I repeated, my voice cold. About what, Natalie? The affair? The lies? Or maybe the fact that you've been carrying another man's child while pretending to be my wife? She flinched, her tears starting again as she stammered. I didn't mean for this to happen. Stop, I said sharply, cutting her off. I don't want to hear that excuse again. You didn't just trip and fall into his arms, Natalie. This was a choice. 1,000 little choices that led us here. She broke down completely, sinking into a chair as sobs racked her body. I know, she choked out. I know I've destroyed everything, and I'll never forgive myself for what I've done to you. Her words sounded genuine, but I couldn't bring myself to trust them. Not yet. I sat across from her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly, and I don't know if I want to try. Her head shot up, panic flashing across her face. Please, she whispered, her voice desperate. Don't give up on us. I'll do anything to fix this, Ryan. Anything. Her plea stirred something inside me, a mix of anger, sadness, and a flicker of something I didn't want to acknowledge. Hope. But hope wasn't enough. I'll think about it, I said, finally standing. But for now, I need space. Don't talk to me unless it's absolutely necessary. She nodded, her tears falling silently as I left the room. That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling as my mind raced. The confrontation had given me some satisfaction, but it hadn't erased the pain. The life I'd known was gone, shattered by Natalie's choices. Now, I had to decide if I was willing to try and rebuild, or if it was time to walk away. The next morning, I woke to an eerie quiet. The house felt colder, emptier, even though Natalie was still here. Her presence had become a burden, a weight pressing down on me every time she entered the room. I found her in the kitchen, staring out the window with a mug of coffee in her hands. She looked fragile, her shoulders slumped, her usual bright energy replaced by a haunting stillness. She turned when she heard me, offering a hesitant smile. "Good morning," she said softly. I didn't respond, brushing past her to grab my own coffee. The silence between us was suffocating. Finally, she spoke. "Are we ever going to talk about this?" I froze, the question hanging in the air. "Talk about what, Natalie?" I asked, my voice cold. "The fact that you've been lying to me for months? Or that you were planning to keep lying?" She flinched but didn't back down. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm still here, Ryan. I'm trying. Trying," I repeated bitterly, turning to face her. "You're only here because I haven't kicked you out yet." Her tears welled up again, but I didn't care. "You don't get to play the victim," I said, my voice sharp. "You did this. You destroyed us." "I know," she whispered, her tears spilling over. "And I'll never forgive myself for it. But I'm begging you, Ryan, don't give up on us." Her words hit me harder than I expected, stirring a mix of anger and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. I set my coffee down, my hands trembling. "I need time," I said finally. "Don't push me, Natalie." She nodded, her tears falling silently as I left the room. The day passed in a blur of routine tasks and unanswered questions. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to Natalie, to Daniels, to the life I thought I knew. Was there anything left to salvage? That evening, Natalie approached me again, her expression cautious but determined. "Ryan," she began, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I've scheduled a therapy session for us. Together. I think it might help." Her words caught me off guard. "You think therapy is going to fix this?" I asked, my tone skeptical. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to try. For us." Her vulnerability was almost painful to witness, and for a moment, I felt the faintest flicker of empathy. But it wasn't enough to erase what she'd done. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice cold. She nodded, her tears shimmering in the dim light. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, as I lay awake in the guest bedroom, I thought about her words. Therapy. It felt like a futile effort, a band-aid on a wound too deep to heal. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth a try. I spent the next few days wrestling with the idea of therapy. It felt like a strange concept, sitting in a room with Natalie, laying our broken marriage bare for a stranger to analyze. But as much as I hated to admit it, part of me wanted to try, if only to prove to myself that I'd done everything I could. When I told Natalie I'd agreed to the session, her relief was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for giving this a chance." Her gratitude stirred something in me, an unfamiliar mix of bitterness and cautious hope. But I didn't let it show. The day of the session, the atmosphere in the car was heavy with tension. Natalie sat quietly beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every so often, she glanced at me, as if searching for reassurance. I didn't give her any. The therapist's office was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the icy wall between us. Dr. Harper greeted us with a kind smile, gesturing for us to sit on the couch across from her. "Welcome," she said gently. "I'm glad you're both here." Her calm demeanor put me slightly at ease, but I remained guarded. Dr. Harper began with simple questions about our marriage, how we met, what we valued in each other, and what had brought us to this point. Natalie answered first, her voice shaking as she recounted our early days together. Her words painted a picture of a life I barely recognized anymore, one filled with laughter, love, and trust. When it was my turn, I hesitated, the memories tinged with the bitterness of her betrayal. "I thought we were happy," I said finally, my voice heavy. "I thought we were building something real." Natalie's tears began again, her hands trembling in her lap. "I ruined it," she whispered. "I ruined everything." Dr. Harper leaned forward slightly, her gaze compassionate but focused. "Can you tell me why?" she asked Natalie. "What led to the choices you made?" Natalie took a deep breath, her voice unsteady. I felt lost, she admitted. Ryan was so focused on his career, and I started to feel invisible. Mark was there. He noticed me when I felt like no one else did. Her words cut deep, and I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. So it's my fault? I asked, my voice sharp. No, she said quickly, her eyes wide. I'm not blaming you, Ryan. This was my choice, my mistake. I take full responsibility. Dr. Harper intervened, her tone gentle but firm. Ryan, it's natural to feel defensive, but this is about understanding, not blame. Natalie isn't excusing her actions. She's trying to explain what led to them. Her words softened the edge of my anger, but only slightly. The session continued, each question peeling back another layer of our fractured relationship. By the time it ended, I felt emotionally drained, the weight of our shared pain almost unbearable. But for the first time, I also felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Possibility. As we left the office, Natalie turned to me, her eyes filled with hope. Do you think we can fix this? She asked cautiously. I hesitated, the answer not coming easily. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think it's worth trying. Her relief was visible, and for a moment, the distance between us felt smaller. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution, but it was a start. The days following the therapy session were a strange mix of tension and cautious hope. Natalie seemed determined to show me she was serious about rebuilding our relationship. She made small changes, shutting her phone off when we were together, offering updates about her day, and checking in with me in ways she hadn't before. Part of me appreciated the effort, but the scars of her betrayal were still raw, and I couldn't bring myself to trust her completely. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Natalie cleared her throat, her hands fidgeting in her lap. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice hesitant. My chest tightened. What is it? I've told Mark everything, she said quietly. About us. About the therapy. I told him we're done, and I'll never see him again. Her words sent a mix of relief and anger surging through me. You told him? I repeated, my voice sharp. Yes, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I wanted to make it clear that I'm choosing you, Ryan. I don't want him in my life, or ours. Her admission should have brought me some comfort, but instead it reopened the wound. You shouldn't have had to make that choice in the first place, I said bitterly. You should have chosen me from the start. I know, she whispered, her tears spilling over. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to make it right, Ryan. I'll do whatever it takes. Her vulnerability left me conflicted. I wanted to believe her, but trusting her again felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if the ground beneath me would hold. The following week, we attended another therapy session. Dr. Harper guided us through more difficult conversations, forcing us to confront the cracks in our relationship that had existed long before Natalie's affair. We both let things fall apart, Natalie admitted, her voice trembling. I made the worst choice possible in trying to fix it. Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was acknowledging the role we'd both played in our downfall. By the time the session ended, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I was starting to understand. That evening, as we sat together on the porch, Natalie spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were? I stared at the horizon, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. No, I said honestly, but maybe we can build something new. Her tears welled up, but this time, her smile broke through. I'd like that, she said softly. For the first time, the weight between us felt lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the scars of her betrayal would never fully heal. But for the first time, I felt like moving forward was possible. Together, the weeks that followed felt like navigating an unfamiliar road, unsteady, with no clear destination in sight. Natalie and I settled into a fragile rhythm, each day a small step forward. She poured her energy into repairing what she'd broken, her actions more meaningful than her words had ever been. I stayed cautious, my heart guarded, but part of me began to see glimmers of the woman I'd once loved. One evening, after dinner, she surprised me with something unexpected. I want to show you something, she said, her voice soft. She led me to her office, where a notebook sat on the desk. What's this? I asked, flipping it open. Inside were pages filled with handwritten letters letters addressed to me. I've been writing these since the affair ended, she explained. I didn't know how to say everything I was feeling, so I wrote it all down. I skimmed the first few pages, her words raw and unfiltered. Every page was filled with apologies, reflections, and promises to do better. It was painful to read, but it was also a glimpse into the depth of her remorse. This doesn't fix anything, I said, closing the notebook. I know, she replied, her voice trembling. But it's how I'm trying to show you that I'm serious, that I'll do whatever it takes. Her words lingered with me long after I left the room. Maybe she really was trying. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. Our next therapy session was different. For the first time, we didn't just talk about the past. We talked about the future. What we wanted, what we needed, and what it would take to rebuild. We'll never be the same, I said, my voice steady. But I think we can be something else, something stronger. Natalie nodded, her tears glistening, but her expression resolute. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. For you. For us. The road wasn't easy. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, piece by piece.